I'm going to be talking about the Camden and Amboy Railroad, obviously, and I'm going to be talking about how it was constructed. I'm not going to talk about the economics or what it did, but more about it. And I want to thank Howard for the introduction and inviting me here. So this is a map, the 1861 map of East Brunswick. East Brunswick was formed in 1860, and it broke up many, many times. So Milltown moved out, South River moved out, Spotswood, Helmetta. So the Camden and Amboy only rides right through this small section of South Amboy. And since I found no stone sleepers in that section, I can't talk about it. So we're done, and I'm going home, and we're finished. Okay?
Does everybody know what a sleeper is?
We'll get to that in a moment. So the objective is to talk about the land surveys, the route decisions, the preparation of the roadbed, the ballast that was used, the stone sleepers, the bridges and trestles, and then features that remain today. All the wood features are gone. This is 200 years ago. So the only thing that's really left is the metal and the wood and the stone. We'll talk about bridges, culverts and trestles, and spikes and railways and plates. Surely, anything you want to do, you can do. So these are stone sleepers. And how did I get involved in this? You heard earlier that I'm a geologist, and I was listening to a lecture by a really good guy who knew a lot more about the Camden Amboy than I did at the time. And he said all the stone sleepers came from Sing Sing prison. Well, I had gone to undergrad up at SUNY New Paltz, which is only 40 miles from Sing Sing prison, and my professor, as a 17, 18-year-old kid, had brought us down there, and the only thing they mined at Sing Sing was marble. And in Bordentown, there's all other types of rock used for stone sleepers. So I went up to him and I asked him, why do you say they were from Sing Sing? He says, that's what all the literature says. So I went and looked at the literature, and sure enough, all of it says they came from Sing Sing. That's incorrect. That's not the main point of this talk, but so you can see where Sing Sing is up in the northeast corner of this map, and Bordentown is where Bordentown is. You're the red star, and when they built that first section, to get stones from Sing Sing down to Bordentown, it's a 300-mile trip. All the stones that you find in Bordentown are within 4 or 5 miles of Bordentown. They don't come from Sing Sing prison. The ones at South Amboy do come from Sing Sing. So these are just some oddities. Now, how do you see these stones today? If you've been to Greenwich Village, you've seen the Washington Arch. That's the marble that they used for this Camden and Amboy. All the brown stones in New York City, they're the stones they use for the Sing Sing. Fordham University, I don't know whether you know where Arnie's Mount Church is, but that's down in Burlington County. And a lot of the houses in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, are made out of gneiss. This is a geologic map, and I've outlined East Brunswick up there in red so you can see where it is. You can see Raritan Bay in the northeast corner and the Delaware River in the southeast. If we add a little bit to it, you can see where the railroad tracks are and where Helmetta, Spotswood, and Old Bridge are, and South Amboy and Hightstown, and the various rock types that we're working with. And by, these are the quarries where they got the rocks from for building the Camden and Amboy Railroad, all these different quarries. So they were being very opportunistic to get the stones that they needed. I'm sure you don't need to have a lecture on geology at this particular time, but this is a basic. So if we take a look at Middlesex County, it was really, there was no Mercer County in 1830. There was a Middlesex, a Monmouth, and there was no Ocean County and a Burlington County. So we're dealing with trying to understand the difference in the political breaks up. designing the Camden and Amboy Railroad, to go from South Amboy to Bordentown was pretty much a straight line right across the state. All they did was follow Bordentown Road out of South Amboy. In Bordentown, it's called Amboy Avenue, and it goes northeast. It's the same road, but that's all they did was follow that.
Waterway to waterway.
From the Raritan Bay to the Delaware River below the rapids.
So did it start in South Amboy or Perth Amboy?
South Amboy.
South Amboy.
South Amboy, yes.
So they had to cross over the waterway to get to Perth Amboy, right? You can't
No,
get
no, there were where the new ferry wharf is in South Amboy. That's where the boats landed, because Raritan Bay never froze up, and so they could go straight to New York City by either sailing boats or steamboats.
so there was no railroad bridge.
No, there's no railroad bridge. Okay, and then once they got to Bordentown, then they could get steamboats and go all the way to Camden or to Philadelphia, but the state mandated that they take the train all the way to Camden.
Why was it important to get to Perth Amboy? Was it a big city?
It wasn't important. No, it was South Amboy. It was never Perth Amboy. It was always
No.
Perth Amboy was the head of East Jersey, I believe.
Oh, it never went to Perth.
No, never went there. So when they designed the road going out of Camden to Bordentown, they really already had steamboats going up and down the Delaware River. So there was no good reason to put the railroad tracks right next to the Delaware River, because they could pick up they couldn't get any additional agricultural or interior products. So they chose that red route to go up through Moorestown, Mount Holly, up to Black Horse, which is Columbus, New Jersey. But what that meant was that they had to go up and down all these hills, and the trains just weren't powerful enough to go up and down them. So they figured if they moved the train tracks in a little bit further east, so they went through Mount Holly, Juliustown, Wrightstown, northward, but that meant that they had to build a spur line into Bordentown, and that was uncomfortable. So what they did was they chose a third route, and that was along the Delaware River. Bingo. It was easy to build, it was flat, and so that was the route they chose. When they got to Bordentown, there was a very steep cliff on the edge of Bordentown. So what they wanted to do, that's that line coming, the black line coming up, and once they crossed that little creek where the blue arrow is, they decided to take that yellow route to head north to the black line on the top of the map. But there happened to be a very wealthy man living where that red pentagon is, an exceptionally wealthy man. And that was Bonaparte's estate. And he didn't want, the richest man in the United States at the time was Girard, for Girard College and whatnot. And he had $60 million. Bonaparte, on the other hand, had $300 million, and every bit of it he got was stolen from the Spanish. But the Spanish stole all that money from the Incas. So it was just the wealthy stealing from the wealthy. So what they did was they tried the yellow route, then the orange route, then the red route, and he said none of that, because that would put the train within 100 feet of his house, and he didn't like that. So they had to make a cut through downtown Bordentown and then continue up north, and it was far enough away from his house. He was still angry. He left the United States 2 years later, never rode on the train. So this is what Bonaparte did by moving the train west of his house and away from his property. But you can see he owned three square miles of property. So they couldn't really go around his property completely. So they got agreements. And it's the first time anybody sued the railroad. And the railroad had eminent domain. Your community has eminent domain. They can take your house if they need it. But I can't take your house because I want to put up a Walmart. The township or the county can, but I can't. And the railroad was a profit-making entity, so they could take they said they could take the property, and he sued them and said, no, you cannot take your property. And so as it resulted, they had to find another route. So in building it, they had to they had to cut down all the trees and take out all the brush. They had to level the land. They had to create a 15-foot wide pathway, the right-of-way. They had to dig drain. They had to dig rail ditches. They had to fill the rail ditches with ballast. They had to compact the ballast. They had to set the sleeper stones. They had to compact the sleeper. They had to lay the iron rail. They had to chisel the top of each stone. Then they had to drill spike holes. Then they could put the spikes into the rails. So this is an example in the late 1800s of how the digging would have been going. Obviously in the 1830s there were no photography, so I don't have pictures of them doing this. But those horses with the wagons behind them, they can only carry 1 ton of material because they're pulling it through mud and sand. And those wheels just won't allow them to pull 5 and 6 tons of material. And this is another example of the guys shoveling dirt into this, and this is how they had to dig the cuts through along the right-of-way. Then they started using temporary railroad tracks. Now you could move 10 tons of dirt at a time, and you could have 1 horse. You could fill up one, he'd attach him to 1 horse, and then attach him to another. Use 1 horse pulling all day long, and he doesn't get any rest, like the workers did. They had to cut a 15-foot wide with 2 ditches on either side of it. And then they had to cut in the middle of the ditch 2 holes, long, thin holes, for putting the stone sleepers in. And then they would say, this is an 1830s drawing done by a scientist who came to the United States to study American railroad buildings. He had been contracted by the Russians to build a railroad from Petersburg to Moscow, and they didn't want to copy the British because the British was such a gentle property there, whereas in the United States we had Pennsylvania, we had New York, we had New Jersey, we had South Carolina, we had lots of different terrain, long distances, much like Russia. So the Russians sent von Gertzner over to the United States, and these are his drawings. Then they had to compact it, so they had this 8-foot diameter wheel with 8 tons of rails in it, and they would just run it over there for about a week, and that would compact the dirt. And then they put gravel in there, and they were opportunistic where they got the gravel from. Lots of it was hand broken. This is not stuff that you put into a machine and get it broken. You have your children with a sledgehammer, and you beat the heck out of the stones that are on your fence wall, and therefore you get a bunch of stones, and you sell that for 35 cents, 50 cents a ton. You're doing well. And so these are some more examples of the stones that they were using for breaking up. And this is an example in Hightstown of us digging underneath the national site for the Camden and Amboy, the stone sleepers and the little display that was there. Here's a stone sleeper, this block that's up where the word sleeper is, and then it's surrounded by cobbles, and you can see the native earth underneath it all. So they had to make the cobble, the top of the stone, level with land surface, because you're going to have horses pulling this. The first 3 years they didn't use steam engines, they used horses. Horses trip on stones, so they had to make everything flush between the rails so the horses could run. So there was about 7 or 8 different styles of stone sleepers. The style that the Camden and Amboy use is predominantly what I've got labeled there, A and B, predominantly letter B, and that's a typical stone sleeper. It's about the size of the cushion on your sofa and about 10 to 12 inches thick. So it's 22 by 22 by 10 inches, and they're about numbers, they're not exact numbers. And this is people quarrying them up on along the DNR, Delaware and Raritan Canal, just south of Lambertville. This is another quarry where they're doing it in Wilbertha area, which is near Scudder's Falls, near Trenton. And this is a place in downtown Trenton where they were doing it next to the state capitol. And these are the various quarries in Trenton. I don't know enough about the quarries that are in the South Brunswick area, East Brunswick area to talk about it. I can do some in the Hudson Valley, but I can't do them in this area. And they had to break the stones up because they would get a block of stone as big as this table, as big as a washing machine or a refrigerator. And so they would drill little holes 2.5 inches deep and then put a pin and feather in it. And then they would just drive that the pin into between the feathers, and it would cause this. And I wanted to break up one of the stones for a purpose over at in Bordentown, and so I bought a set of pin and feathers. It's amazing how easy it is. Once you've drilled the holes, and I just used an electric drill to drill the 3-inch holes, but I drilled them every 6 inches, broke the rock up with no problem at all. No, they would have used a jackhammer. One man was a jack, the other guy was a hammer. So it was a star bit that was about this long. You can see the hammer and the up this.
So as you hit it, it twisted?
No, as you hit it, then you turn it. Then you turn it. So with a jackhammer and a mine, one guy, the jack, was here, and then the hammer was the other guy. So you had to trust that other guy. And he'd hit it, and then you turn it a quarter turn. He'd hit it, and you turn it a quarter turn.
It was tempered steel of some sort.
Yeah.
It had to be.
Yeah.
Oh my God. It goes. How do you sharpen it?
So these are the typical tools. This is a pin and feather right here. That's typical hammer, and that's how you would break the rocks up. So this is an advertisement that was in the Philadelphia newspaper. There's almost an identical advertisement in a New York City newspaper. E.A. Stevens, John Stevens' son, and Robert Stevens' brother, who was the financial officer. So what he wanted here was 30,000 stone blocks. He needed 2,000 to Camden, 2,000 to Bordentown, and 26,000 to Crosswicks Creek. And then they would just distribute them. The stones had to be 18 by 21 inches, minimum of 18 by 21, 10 to 13 inches thick. And he wouldn't accept any contracts for less than 2,000 bricks. And he wanted them delivered by January 1st, 1831. That's what that whole article says. In a letter to his brother, they received multiple bids, and in the Bordentown, they could get each stone for 33 cents. And in South Amboy, they could get them for 44.5 cents per stone. But half a year later, they realized they could go to Sing Sing prison and get them for 27 cents a stone, which was much cheaper, save all that money. So,
The transportation.
but you got free labor. So that
Didn't we have prisons in New Jersey at that time?
we had prisons, but no, the prisons were not like that. The prison in Trenton, men and women were in the same prison. These guys were people who had stolen chickens. They were not mass murderers. They weren't really bad
The
people.
prison where you are, in Bordentown, did that exist at the time?
Oh, no, no. So the way Sing Sing prison came about was they had to ship all the prisoners from New York City to Auburn, New York. And that was a very big financial expense. And then the families could never see their children in prison. And so they had stonemasons that were in prison build the Auburn prison. They said, boy, if we found the proper land near New York City, we'd only have to travel them a half a day's ride. They could go home, their family could see them, the chance of rehabilitation was much better. So that's why they built Sing Sing Prison in Ossining, New York.
And that's on the river, isn't it?
Yes, it's right on the river. It's just downstream from Bear Mountain Bridge. It's about 25 miles.
River.
Yeah, the Hudson River. That's really, okay. So how did they move them? They moved them on what were called stone sleds, or with these tongs, much like you'd move a block of ice or something like that. 5 or 6 men could grab onto each side of the tong, lift it up and move it. Because we're talking a 500-pound block of stone. None of us here could lift 500 pounds. 4 of us could lift 500 pounds. So you have to get a bunch of guys doing this. So they built it by laying the stones out, and they spread them apart by 3.2 feet approximately. And every fifth stone was exactly 16 feet apart, because the rails were exactly 16 feet long. They didn't want to have a joint where there's nothing supporting it. So they made every fifth rail exactly 16 feet. And then they would put a rail onto it, mark where the holes would have to be. Then they would drill each one of the holes. And once the hole was drilled, then they would put a wood tree nail, in each hole, and then they put the stone back on, and then they pound a spike into the tree nail. And that's how they built the rail. And so this is a typical rail, and you can see it's approximately 20 by 20 inches. And they drilled 2 holes, and they also had to, because you would have a row of 500 stones, and this stone was just a little bit higher than that stone. Well, to lift every stone up so they're perfectly flat was virtually impossible. So what they would do is they would chisel out a little rectangle in the rock, and then they would set a board in the rock, and this way they could sometimes make the board a half an inch, an inch and a half, 2 inches thick, and they could level the whole roadway. And that's how they leveled the rails. The other advantage of that was when you had an iron rail up against a piece of gneiss or a piece of granite or a piece of sandstone, it would abrade the iron. So the wood prevented the abrading. So that wood shim stopped abrading, it leveled the railroad. In addition, it provided for a smoother ride. Now, the smoother ride wasn't intended for you. The smoother ride was intended for the cars and the steam engine. Because if they drove it back and forth without the wood, they would loosen all the nuts and bolts on the steam engine. So a trip of 31 miles from Bordentown to South Amboy back again, 60 miles, they would end up spending the next 12 hours tightening all the nuts and bolts on the train. So it was imperative to ease that.
Pierre, was this railroad initially, was this a passenger line or a freight line or both?
Yes, it was because most freight went by the D&R Canal.
Right.
But lots of freight was perishable, the fruits and vegetables of the farm, the apple farm here. If they could get those onto that train, they would be in New York City an hour and a half later, as opposed to taking it from here to someplace on the Raritan River and then putting it onto a boat and then sailing it.
And all the farms where you live.
Yes, exactly, yeah. So you could bring them to Philly. The reason why we're the Garden State is because of this.
So a farmer like Smith would have to get his apples by moving them he'd have to bring them to a railroad location.
Before that, he would have had to bring them by wagon.
All right, by wagon. Yeah.
And so now bringing it by wagon down to the train station in Old Bridge, yes. Yeah, so we're talking 2 miles he's got to move them,
Right.
as opposed to bringing them to someplace else, putting them on a boat, puts them on the train, gets them, and then you have regular service into New York City. And so they're in there the next day, 2 days later, a day later. So this really just covers this again, how this is a top view and a side view, the stone block with the wood apron, and then the T-rail and the spikes that hold it in with ballast around it. Then they would have to tamp the rails down, so they built this 20-foot high tripod, and they would drop a 1-ton block on the top of each stone just to make sure the stone was set. And there was a whole system of lifting it by a bunch of mules and then dead dropping that weight. So there's 4 patterns. I'm going to show you 3 of them. The 4-hole pattern is where 2 rails came up together. So they'd spike 1 rail here and 1 rail here. And so that was the 2-hole pattern. It's either the left hole is forward or the right hole is forward. No difference. It's just how they ended up doing it. But I was trying to understand why I was seeing different things. And so you can find some of these holes with spikes still in them, and you can see where there's a areola around each one of them that's a rust stain, things like this. And you can see where the rail has abraded the stone in some of them. So they had to break it. So some quarries broke them up with pin and feathers. Other quarries used these wedge-shaped devices to bust them all up, and you see those features, those quarry features in them. And then you have to get paid. If you've ever worked in an apple orchard, when you pick a crate of apples, they give you a little card, and the number 31 is on it, and you've put that in there. So the 100 bushels that you pick, each one of them has the number 53 on it. That's your number, and then you get paid 14 cents per bushel for the 102 bushels. That's how it's done. Well, how do you make sure that you get paid for the stones you chiseled out? So you put your initial on them. And so there's about 20 different initials that I found on these things, the letter G, O. So.
Excuse me, Pierre.
Yes.
In Bordentown, I've been there a number of times. I've done bike rides there. It's a beautiful town for those interested. And it's right on the Delaware.
Correct.
And everything leads down to Bordentown.
Correct.
So it was a big industrial, agricultural. The railroad that I see that goes north-south there, it's down below the street.
That's correct.
Is that the,
That's the Camden
why,
Amboy.
why is it, in other words, it's about 20 or 30 feet below the rest of the...
Joseph Bonaparte wouldn't allow them to go around and across his property, so they had to dig it through the center of town.
Oh my gosh, when you go there, you take over a bridge and you look down below and you see the tracks that are still...
That's the oldest railroad bridge in the world over flat-bottom T-rails.
It's a beautiful old town.
Yeah.
That's
This
where
Bonaparte-
the Clara Barton Schoolhouse is.
That's
in
correct,
Milltown.
yeah.
So this Bonaparte was related to Napoleon Bonaparte, I take it, right?
Yes, he was
brother?
his older brother. So Napoleon Bonaparte was obviously the emperor. He wanted to be the emperor of the earth. He never got that far, but he instilled his brother to become first the king of Naples. Then he made him the king of Spain, and he was that for about but he didn't have the same temperament as his younger brother Napoleon, and he really was more of an artist and a farmer and things like that. And so he just took all the money from the museums and the coffers and left. And when they lost the Battle of Waterloo, he hightailed it to the United States.
I understand he was well liked in the board.
Well, if you've got 10 million, 30 million, $300 million and you give it to you to come and make a fence on my property and you pay me, and then you throw oranges in on top of it, you know. Yes.
In 1830, would I make more money working on the railroad than working on a farm?
Yes.
It's hard work. You know, if it's your farm, you reap all the benefits. But if it's your farm and insects get it, it's another problem. So farming is a very difficult job to do because you got to play with the weather. You got to play with Mother Nature. And I don't know whether you'd earn more money. Nobody got wealthy except for the top tier. So they use different types of stone, the metamorphic, sedimentary, and igneous rocks. And so the gneiss is a type of metamorphic rock. If you go up the Hudson Valley or if you go into Philadelphia, it's mostly gneisses and schists are more sparkly. There's a lot of mica in them. There's less mica in gneiss. Marble is what you see. There's lots of it. Philadelphia used to be called Marble City in the 1830s and 40s because they've got a lot of marble stoops. The sandstone is just the brownstones of New York City and a lot of churches around here. And the conglomerates are all the hilltops, Cherry Hill, Mount Holly, Arnie's Mount, Mount Laurel, the New Jersey or the Atlantic Highlands. They're all topped by that conglomerate. And so that could have been.
Rocky Hill ever used as a source of stone? Rocky Hill, New Jersey, near Princeton?
Rocky Hill, that's a basalt, and yes, there were some basalts used. Yeah, it's not a conglomerate, it's another rock type. It's a big,
That grade they use today
Yeah,
for
yeah.
road beds.
yes. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to show you is the 12 of the 14 styles of railroads that were built by the Camden and Amboy. Because you build the railroad your way, you build it your way, you build it your way, and you'd say, she did a better job on this part, but she did a better part on that job. So you'd kind of meld things together, and after a while, you began to realize you were constantly improving the railroad. And that's one of the things that von Gertzner began to realize. Lots of the railroads out in the western part of the United States only used wood, so they only built it with one style by 1838 when he came in here. But the Camden and Amboy was building theirs in 1830, 31, 32, 33, and so they used lots of different styles. They started out with stone sleepers, then they went to ties and planks because they couldn't use stone sleepers over rivers. They had to have a walkway for the horse to go over, so they built a dance floor for the horse to walk on. Then the third style was stone rails. That's what the B&O Railroad was using, and the Philadelphia and Columbia. Then they used wood ties because there was a cholera epidemic at Sing Sing prison, so they couldn't get any more of the 27-cent stones, and they didn't want to pay 34 and 44 cents for the expensive stones, so they went to wood. And then they use ground boards, which are just wide planks. Then they use wood posts to go across swampland. And everything, after that, they just use wood in different configurations. So this is what a typical stone array would look like. You see the rail, it's 3.5-inch rail with a ground board. This is a display we're building in Bordentown right now. And then this is how they went over rivers. Obviously, I'm only showing an 8-foot example, but for go over some of them, they were 300 feet long that they had to go over bridges. And then the horse could walk across this feature.
Do anything to treat the wood so it wouldn't rot?
Not initially. It was just fresh wood. And then these are stone rails, and they just use strap rails. See, these are all using flat bottom T-rail. So this is an original Camden and Amboy flat bottom T-rail. This is what a T-rail looks like. It's flat bottom, and Robert Stevens invented this type of rail.
Is that steel or iron?
This is iron, this is steel. This came from Wales, this came from someplace else. This is the stone rail. And then when Sing Sing was having its cholera epidemic, and they didn't want to spend more money, they just started laying out wood ties across the road. Then when they was building the section from Bordentown to Camden, they built the section from Bordentown to South Amboy first. They used those 4 styles of rail. Then they built it from Bordentown to Camden. And this is the most prolific type, where they laid ground boards, which are those boards that are on the ground, and then they lay 2-foot rails and 8-foot rails on top of it. Then they would put the rail on top of that, cross ties, excuse me. The ground boards, a man told me, he says, you're not doing this properly. You have to use the real type of wood. I bought all this wood at Lowe's and Home Depot. And I said, those ground boards were 12 inches wide, 5 inches thick, 30 feet long, chestnut. Get me a piece of chestnut for under $20 and I'll buy it, but you just can't do that.
Is that all crushed stone that it's?
Yes, yeah.
That's a lot of stone.
Yes. Now, if it had been the Camden and Amboy, they would have filled that crushed stone up so that the horses could walk across it.
Okay. Yeah, how deep is that stone?
Oh, that stone's 4 inches, 3 inches.
That's all? Only 4
Yeah.
inches?
For
Yeah.
demonstration.
Yes, this is not going to support a trade. This is built by me and you and you and you.
With the wood configurations.
The wood, it shows how it was built. Then to go across swamplands, because they'd have to bring in muck, because it's all muck, you have to, so what they did was they drove posts every 3 feet across, down 7 feet, and then they cut them all off level and put a rail on top of that. So that's how they went across swamps. And then sometimes when they had causeways, because causeways are fresh earth, you dig this hole here, or you work on the just straight flat land. A causeway has differential compaction of the soils, and that differential compaction causes this side to sink and that, so they tried to spread out the weight. So this is how they did temporary rails on causeways. That's my geology. And then, this is to answer your question, they built 3 styles of rail. They used this exact same style of wood. With this style, they drilled the hole every 16 inches and then filled that hole with table salt and let the table salt impregnate the wood. That was for preserving the wood. The other method was to take the wood and put it in a campfire and burn it all. And by putting a char on the outside of it, charred wood doesn't rot. So they would char the wood. And the last method is the barns around here, they had to preserve them. And so they would paint them with lime. The insects didn't like to eat the lime. So they would either soak the wood in a bath of lime water or paint it with lime. And that was the first use of wood preservatives because they hadn't invented creosote. Creosote wasn't invented till 1858.
We have a lot of lime in North Jersey, right?
Limestone, yeah.
That's where a lot of lime comes from.
Yeah, they get a lot of their lime. You know, when you burn wood, you get ashes. Well, a lot of that's the calcium carbonate that's in the tree, and so that you could paint it with ashes and things like that. And then this method, you have the rails. You have the ground boards, or the cross ties are every 8 feet, and the ground boards are whatever length they can buy them at. But the cross ties here, they put cross ties every 4 times. And they describe this, but they don't say where this was used on the section from Bordentown to downtown Trenton. And then finally, in 1839, they started to build the railroad track from Trenton to New Brunswick. And they went right along the DNR Canal until they got about 3 miles north of Princeton to Rocky Hill, Kingston. And then they cut off cross country. But this is really the first time that they start using what you and I would think of as a railroad track. These are set at 1.2, they had 11 cross ties per 15 feet of rail. They usually only have about 8 cross ties now per 15 feet of rail.
Who paid for it? Is it,
The paying customers. This was such a profitable railroad that it paid more than 1/3 of the state government taxes.
but they got investors.
Oh yeah, the investors people learned lots of money because of this. So that's the end of the first part. Now what exists today as you walk around your community? Okay, so starts in South Amboy, or we'd start in South Amboy and go to Fieldsboro, and you see the community of Heightstown, Spotswood, Helmetta, Jamesburg, whatnot. So I'm going to be talking about what's going on in Burlington County first, then I'll talk about Mercer County, then I'll talk about Middlesex County, each one of these townships. So this is near Fieldsboro. This is just, they've repurposed these stone sleepers along the Delaware River as a tide break, because the tide keeps on eroding the shoreline for multiple reasons. So they just repurposed them for that. And they've got them piled up in lots of places. This is for a stream that's coming down the side of a hill. And they built the lower left-hand corner. That's a stone wall that was built in the community. And here along the modern riverline tracks in the upper right, you can see stone sleepers are used just for keeping the hill slope stabilized. This is in Bordentown City. there's these stone walls in the cut that you were speaking about. Originally they just had 3-foot high stone walls with a slope going off, but they were losing a lot of the city because of that 45-degree slope. So they built 12-foot high stone walls, and all of these stones that have the letter G or a little dot on them, they're all nices and they're all stone sleepers. So by 1842, when they built this wall, they were repurposing the stone sleepers at that point. There's a monument in downtown. That's the first monument built to honor a historic railroad. That was put up in 1891 by the Pennsylvania Railroad. That's the first American monument honoring a historic railroad. And those are other examples of stone sleepers in Bordentown. If you come a little bit out of Bordentown, about 2.5 miles, you'll see in situ stone sleepers. That on the left-hand side, you see an array of 6 of them, and you can see the 4-hole sleeper at the bottom of the thing, and then there's a 5-holer, then a bunch of 2-holers. Something broke there, but exactly 15 feet dead center from this one, the next one up, is another 4-hole, exactly 15. The stones are about 3.2, but they range. And so that's how once I find a 4-holer, I know where to dig the next hole. I don't do a lot of digging because it's not very much fun. So that was, now we're going to talk about Mercer County. And so in Mercer County, there's a section of railroad. You can see the old railroad tracks with the stone sleepers underneath it in 2 different locations. And then they repurpose when you see this ductile steel pipe for culverts, and you see these stone sleepers used in it, everything else is just blocks of sandstone. And so those are examples of where you can see it in situ on the far side, ex situ, and repurposed for a bridge or a culvert. This is up in Robbinsville. They're just buried in situ. And I only dug out 2 of them, but I found thousands of them with a probe. You can just find them, and there's no way I'm going to dig thousands of them. This is in East Windsor Township. This is just laying on the side of the road next to Route 130. I didn't do a lot of work there because people get very curious when you're digging next to a side of a public highway, so it's best to walk away from it. This is the display that's at National Registry of Historic Places in downtown Heightstown. And I was just starting, and so this woman from the Heightstown Historical Society asked if I'd help her identify where these were. So we went and found all the quarries that this would have been 4 miles south of there in Perrineville. And they use them as monuments and displays within the park systems of Bordentown or of Heightstown. They just use them as street scenery and streetscape. They have 500 or 600 of them. I called them up. I needed to get 16 stone sleepers to make my display, not mine, but the Bordentown Historical Society's display. And I said, could I have some of your sleepers? And they said, but we have them all. I said, no, you have 2 piles of 200 stones that they're not really displayed. And they said, where are they? And I told them, and they said, are you sure? I said, why don't we go out and take a walk and I'll show you what you have. And once they saw these piles in the woods, they said, yeah, you could have 16 of these.
What town is this?
This is Heightstown.
Is there a rail there still?
No, they've torn it out from, I don't know how, about 4 miles northeast of Bordentown, all the way to Cranberry Station. The rails have been removed.
There is a railroad at Cranberry Station. There is tracks there still.
That's where it starts up again.
And is the width of these rails the same?
No. They've been narrowed to 4 feet 8.5 inches. They originally were 4 feet 10
So
inches.
from Cranberry Station north, it's one width, and then south.
No. Everything today, everything in the United States is 4 feet 8.5 inches.
In those days, what was it?
It was whatever you decided was for your railroad. And that's one of the reasons why it was difficult during the Civil War, because most people in the South used 5 feet. Most people in the North used 4 feet, 8.5 inches. So you couldn't take a train from Pennsylvania into Georgia because you had to take everything off the train. And that's why the Russians have a different gauge than Europe. So the Europeans can't bring armaments into Russia on a train. So this is in Hightstown. These are, in the Lair State Park, they took the stones from Hightstown you can see these displays if you go to the little Pine Creek Railroad. At the State Museum, they also got some, New Jersey State Museum in Trenton, they got 4 stone sleepers that came out of Hightstown. And the Smithsonian in 1982 came to Hightstown because they had so darn many stones. They wanted to redisplay the John Bull steam engine. And so they got an additional 32 stone sleepers. So I called up the Smithsonian and asked if I could take a look at them. The guy says, why? So I told him why. And then I went out there, and usually what I do when I number each stone, like this array, I'll just name it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then when I'm writing my notes, I can't remember whether I'm talking about this stone or that stone. So I can just say I've got just a piece of magic marker and a piece of duct tape on it. It says number 3, so I'm always writing the same information. And he says, no, you cannot put anything on the stones. And after 2 hours of working with that, I had put little flags near them and whatnot. He says, oh, label them. Okay. Nobody had looked at them in 30 years. So anyway, in Hightstown, they have a display at the Hightstown Historical Society in the upper left. And then behind the Hightstown Historical, they got a display of about 22 stone sleepers in one of their parks, Rocky Brook Park. They have about 150 stone sleepers. They even repurposed it as a bench in one of their parks. I think they're a rather clever group of people, what they're doing with their stone sleepers there. If you go down to, this is in the woods in East Windsor. There's in situ stone sleepers that are in the ground, and then there's piles that are just sitting in the woods. So I showed them these piles, and they said, okay, yeah, you can have some.
There was construction going on, and they got in the way.
Yeah, when they built the Route 133 bypass over the north side of Hightstown, they unearthed a lot of stones, and they just dumped them in the woods. So now we're going into Middlesex County. So I'll talk about Cranberry, James Monroe, Jamesburg, and I talk about, because Monroe is a donut community, so I talk about Monroe South and Monroe North, just so that I kind of break it up for my purposes, and the same as we go across the state. So in Cranberry, they have a little 4-stone display at their Historical Society building, and then when they rebuilt the turnpike about 4 years ago, they exposed 3 or 4 of them, and I don't know what they did to those stones. And then at Cranberry Station, they were doing putting in some service lines, and so they put in they exposed those. Then in Monroe Township, they have the Historic Day Farm Museum, and inside this red square, there's 88 stone sleepers, and they just have them all on display. They also have that array of 16 or 12 stone sleepers with a monument next to it. And then they also use them on Half Acre Road. And then when Hurricane Ida came through, it washed out the railroad tracks, suspending the ties, and exposed about a dozen stone sleepers in situ directly underneath the existing rails. It's absolutely an amazing place to go see this stuff. This is in Monroe Township. This is called the most photographed place on earth, most photographed railroad in New Jersey. And I went there and I looked at it and I said, this seems weird. Something was bothering me about it, because I'd seen this picture multiple times. And then I looked at these spikes. This is a modern spike. It's got a big dog head on it, and it's a ½ inch. It's 3/4 of an inch thick. This is a Camden and Amboy Railroad spike. This is a bona fide reproduction. They found the stones and then they just put rails on top of it and spiked it in with modern spikes. And so it threw me off. And then I realized they never ended a rail where there wasn't a stone underneath it. So this was made up in the 1930s to get people for railroad fans. But you can see these stones all in the woods all the time. This is a park that's in Thompson Park, where they have stone sleepers at the entrance to Thompson Park in the village of Monroe Township. And this is in Jamesburg. Jamesburg is named after James Buckalew, and James Buckalew rented mules to the Camden and Amboy Railroad to build the railroad. So that's where he got all his big money. And this is the Camden and Amboy Railroad today, but in 1830, it was built like this. So you have to go through a junkyard and across some swampland, but it's more than 1,000 feet east of the existing Camden and Amboy, of the existing modern railroad. And that was when the Pennsylvania Railroad was trying to straighten out all the curves that were in the...
Pierre, are the current tracks still used by any railroad?
Oh, absolutely,
They
yes.
are used.
Yes, as a matter of fact,
It's a freight line, isn't it?
yes, it's only freight. I was right here a couple of days ago, and trains went right by me.
Because when I drive down Bordentown Avenue, which I do frequently, there's constantly Conrail. Well, it's not Conrail anymore, whatever it is today. There's all Conrail vehicles. Brown's Yard is down there. Yeah. And I see a lot of railroad trains moving in and out of there.
In Helmeta, where the railroad goes through, where the snuff factory was, a little north of it, there was a development they built. And the story was that when they built, they were on the west side of the tracks. And if the railroad was being running, they couldn't get fire trucks across.
Oh.
That was the concern.
And there's always those local concerns, and the locals will work them out somehow. In Monroe Township, you'll find these in situ stone sleepers and ex situ stone sleepers in various places. In Helmeta, in front of the city hall, they've got 2 stone sleepers, and one of them has the letter B on the side of it, which I thought was rather interesting, because almost all the letters are on the top. They're never on the sides. And so that's the only letter I've ever seen on the sides. And then if you go to Helmeta Pond, there's Helmeta Pond. The map on the left shows the pond is a blue area. The air photo on the right shows that it's really a bunch of islands and it's not all water. But that tan area is all filled. And if you walk around that tan area, you'll find stone sleepers sticking up out of the dirt. So they just use stone sleepers as fill to give you some firmament to walk on around the pond. And then down in this part of the community, railroad buffs have found stone sleepers and they put them in their lawn. So there's 3 or 4 stone sleepers in front lawns, in front of the Postal Service, and in front of the City Hall. And then there's a residence right over here that has 2 of them in his front lawn.
How did he move them?
You get 2 young bucks or 4 young bucks, or you get a machine. That's the only way to do it, you know. This is in Spotswood. They've got a nice little display of 4 stone sleepers. There used to be at the Budweiser plant another display. I think that has been, if anybody knows specifically where it has been moved to, I'd appreciate you telling me that.
I think it was moved to Spotswood.
You think it was moved to Spot? Okay, because I've heard a number of things. I've heard that it was moved to the Day Farm, and I've heard it was moved to Spotswood. So, and I don't know if who I could talk to.
Yeah, I used to go back there to go fishing.
Okay.
Yeah, after the factory was gone. And one day it was gone, and then I noticed it not too much later that it was
that display like that over there for Spotswood.
Okay.
Touch base with Mark Nutstead. He's the county
Okay.
historian. He lives in the historic
Okay.
district. I've heard him talk about sleepers, but I didn't know anything about them until today.
Okay.
When you get to this area, which is 500 feet or a half a mile from this building, I couldn't find any stone sleepers. But I have to believe that when they went over the bridge over South River, that they had to have built, some substantial bridge so that horses could walk across that. This is up off of something Quake Road, Cheesequake Road. After the hurricane went through, Hurricane Sandy, it exposed lots and lots of stone sleepers. So I got now they're pretty much covered over again. But you can see on the south side of it is what's on the south side of Cheesequake Road is that array that's on the left, and on the north side, right-hand side is the array that's on the north of Cheesequake Road. And they're all marble. And this, when they wanted to build that ferry in South Amboy, they had to do an archaeological dig. So the archaeological dig exposed all of these stone sleepers. And the archaeological firm that was doing that invited me up to take a look at what they were doing. And they were saying that these are in situ stone sleepers. And I said, no, I don't believe so. And he said, why? And so I gave him 5 or 10 reasons why I didn't think they were. And he says, I said, I'll tell you what, why don't we go down to Cheesequake Road and I'll show you what in situ sleepers look like. So he and I went down there. Now this is a man with a PhD. I don't have a PhD in history. I don't even have a PhD in geology. And he saw what I showed him on Cheesequake. He said, holy Moses. We go back and he says, I'm supposed to give a lecture because the Department of Transportation, Department of Historic Preservation Office, and the South Amboy Historical Society was there. He was supposed to explain to them about these rocks. He says, I'm supposed to give you a talk, but I don't know as much as this guy does. So I'm going to let him talk, and if he fumbles anywhere, well, that'll be it. Anyway, so he's a really nice guy. Anyway, so they made a low tide. You can see all the stone sleepers. They found piles and piles of them. They just made a big pile of them. In the upper left-hand corner, there's streetscapes made out of stone sleepers in South Amboy. And you can see all this. They almost made because the beach is all mud, I think they laid the stone sleepers so that at low tide, all the barges would rest on stone rather than get into the mud. And there's thousands of them. And they're all covered with barnacles, but you can see how white that is. That's just a marble.
I've hiked the rails around South Amboy sometimes, mountain biked it. And when you go, does anyone know what Hole in the Wall is in South Amboy?
I can't say I do.
Okay, it's a really small, narrow tunnel, 2 tunnels.
Oh, yes, I do know.
Yeah,
Those two.
Yeah, it was like just wide enough for your car.
Yeah.
It was plenty wide for a Model T. Right above there, I've hiked. And there's piles and piles of old rail
Yes,
and the marble sleepers.
yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a bunch of sleep. Yeah, I found 10 or 15 up on
Yeah,
on
and
that one.
I first saw those. Wow, sleepers!
Yeah.
And I never saw those before.
If you see a location where there's sleepers or these stones, do you need permission from any existing railroad to move those or
To move them is another thing. To look at them is another story. If you own a piece of land in the Adirondacks and I walk on your property and you ask me to leave, I leave. If I see some rock outcrop, you say, what are you doing? I say, I'm just mapping the rocks here. We start having a conversation, and then you realize I'm not going to do anything but identify the rock type and some other characteristics about it. And I've told you enough to keep you happy. But I don't move these rocks. I might, to chip a rock, geez, you run those into with a boat and a guy. So.
But are these rocks within the railroad right away?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so you have to go to Conrail or whoever is in charge of that right away to get permission if you needed to, you wanted to do a display, and you wanted to
Yes.
move those.
If I want to move the stones, I need the landowner's
Or even
permission.
look at it, because that's, you're trespassing.
Yes,
That's-
and you're, yes.
That's,
And my philosophy there,
Department of Homeland Security over there.
yeah.
Ice.
Terrorist crime.
And do you know Woody Guthrie?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Woody Guthrie wrote a song, "This land is your land, this is my land." And one of the verses in that song is, "As I was walking, I saw a sign there. And the sign, it said, 'No trespassing.' But the other side didn't say nothing. That side was meant for you and me."
You know, I remember when I was practicing law, I had a lot of dealings with Conrail in connection with the railroad bridges, which they still control. And getting them to agree to anything is not easy.
No, it's
They're difficult, yeah, they're difficult.
You know, as far as big companies like that, everything is either an asset or a liability, and it's always a liability. It's never an asset. So it's a lot for me to go up and look at. I don't want to be killed by a passing train. That's my first rule. So I practice safe when I'm around trains. And so I always have the train schedule. I know when the next train, and you can always hear them, and you can hear them and see them.
Yeah.
So you just stay safe.
Where I had difficulties with the railroad is that if you represent a developer or builder who's building something, a building near a railroad right-of-way that's close to it or a railroad bridge, Conrail gets involved,
Yeah.
or Amtrak, they get involved because they control that, and you need their permission, or you have to notice them, and you need the patience of Job to deal with. Believe me, I remember that.
That display of 12 styles of railroad, that is on New Jersey Transit property. I started 3.5 years ago. It took me 2.5 years to get permission to use that fallow piece of ground. But I got it. Now that they see what is on it, the whole display, they kind of like it. And so they have bent over backwards to help me in the future. So the 2.5 years of patience working with them, explaining to them what I was doing, why I was doing, how I was doing it, what we intended, has paid off.
Are you worried about liability, you falling, hurting yourself, and getting sued? Is that what the reason why they took?
I don't worry. You know, I've worked all my life in the woods. I've fallen down 1,000,000 times.
I understand, but they don't know what you do, the way you do, so it's different perspective.
Everything is a liability or an asset, and I am always a liability.
I don't want to jump ahead. Will you explain, what trains are using it today? In other words, is there one train line, the Raritan, Delaware and Raritan?
From Trenton to Camden.
Excuse me, my dentist is right next to the train tracks down here in the historic district. And when that diesel engine is sitting there idling, you can, just sitting there.
Your teeth are rattling.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah. And the answer to your question is, I don't know. I'm looking really at the historical Camden and Amboy, and the modern stuff is just, it's like when I do geology, trees and bushes are in my way, and the modern,
But it's all freight today, right?
Correct.
That's right.
it's all freight on this end. On Bordentown end, there's the river line that goes from Trenton to Camden, and that does 20 or 30 trips per day.
What I've learned in the media is that when New Jersey Transit has a track problem, it's not their tracks. The
Yeah.
tracks belong to Amtrak.
Exactly.
And Amtrak has to correct it.
That may be correct for the Northeast Corridor.
And they're very deficient, very deficient.
Yeah.
So,
That's why they,
I have a question. There's last section they were building, right before they got to South Amboy. They had to cut through a big sand hill.
correct.
And the story I was told was that the sleepers weren't keeping up with them. They were just rapidly laying down track. So they decided as an experiment to use wooden ties.
And that's correct. That's
And from then on, they used wooden ties.
That's not correct. Okay. They, when they were purchasing the stone sleepers from Sing Sing prison at 27 cents per stone. And then the cholera epidemic hit Sing Sing prison. They couldn't deliver. So they could have gone to any of the other quarries in town and purchased them for 44 cents. But they didn't want to pay the 44 cents, and they wanted to get the railroad started. So the author in 1891, a guy by the name of Ephraim Watkins, wrote that because of the lack of delivery from Sing Sing prison, it was really because I don't want to spend 44 cents for a 27-cent stone. And so it was...
And the transportation didn't, wasn't.
They weren't sure that it was going to be a successful railroad. And as you know, the Northeast Corridor kind of took all the steam out of the Camden and Amboy railroads because it was much easier just to take a ferry from Manhattan Island to Hoboken and then take a train down to Philadelphia and go over the Delaware River. So you didn't have to change trains at all.
Now, I like that section, allegedly where they started using the wood ties.
Yeah.
And basically it was like a huge wood, sand bank. You could see it from the other side of the
Yeah.
Raritan as you're going south over the Route 9 bridge.
Yeah.
I was told that behind you was the glacial moraine,
No, the
north
glacial-
of the Raritan.
Yeah, the glacial moraine goes through Metuchen. It does not, it's not even down here.
But on the southern side, I don't think it's a glacial moraine. It's just a ridge of sand.
Yeah, it's the tail end of what's called the Atlantic Highlands.
Yeah.
You know, where Mount Mitchell is and whatnot.
It was a huge project for them
Yes.
to dig that because of the angle proposed.
Yeah.
And so I heard that to speed it up and
Yeah.
lessen the man hours, they
So-
started using wood ties.
The way that the Mohawk and Hudson solved going up a steep hill, the Philadelphia and Columbia going up a steep hill, and the B&O going up a steep hill, was to build the stationary and the Morris Canal to go up the steep hills to cross over the New Jersey Highlands, was to build inclined planes. And so they would drive a canoe, or they drive something up, and then they would pull it up that inclined plane. That's what they were planning on doing. But it was such a massive bottleneck for these other railroads that they canned it. They decided to dig it up.
Can I see a railroad wood tie? That's not a sleeper? Is that?
No, a wood tie in America is a sleeper in England. So it's like a lorry is a pickup truck in the United States. So it's just another
In
name.
this country, a wood tie is a wood tie. It's not a
Wood tie is a wood tie, and these are ties. But the reason why it's called a tie because in the wintertime, this stone would lift, this would not. Whereas a wood tie, if this lifted, you still kept your 4 feet 8.5 inch gauge. Didn't matter what the hell happened because the tie tied them together. But the sleeper was just something sleeping in a bed. You raise it, you lost your gauge.
And today, what do they use, concrete?
They use yes.
And what, are they called sleepers?
No, they're called concrete ties.
Ties, they're all
Yeah.
called ties. But they always go perpendicular to the tracks, right?
Unless you're going on a monorail or you're going on up in the jet line, you know, they have they just have long, thin rails. So this is the new park up in at South Amboy for the ferry boat. And these are, they've just repurposed a couple of hundred stone sleepers as displays, and they also exposed some stone rail. I'd never seen that before. There's another type of stone sleeper used by the Camden and Amboy, and you can see in the lower right hand, the distance between the holes is 4.5 inches. On the other ones, it's 7 inches. And the 7-inch one had a wood beam on it. And so the rail was put on top of the wood beam. The only place I find those with the 7-inch and the wood beam is at the wharf in Bordentown. and I found 85 of them, which would make a couple of 100 feet of rail. So when the John Bull came disassembled from England to Philadelphia, and then they shipped it up to Bordentown, they had to reassemble it on a set of rails. So those are the stone sleepers that the John Bull was assembled on top of. This is how they built the railroad. These are stone sleepers that I found up in the for the Camden Amboy and South Amboy. This is stone rail down in Philadelphia for the Philadelphia and Columbia Railroad. And in the upper right, that's the stone sleeper for the B&O Railroad. So these are the three types of stone sleepers that the Camden and Amboy used, with a flat bottom T-rail on a stone with a block of wood, a strap rail, and a stone rail with a strap rail. This is my way of doing geology. So you start at Burlington County, Mercer County, Middlesex County, and the blue dots are where I find gneisses. And you can see that there's lots of gneisses up to middle Mercer County, and then from Heightstown there's lots of gneisses up to South Amboy. They're pink gneisses on the South Amboy side of this figure, and they're gray gneisses. And if you look at the gneisses in the Hudson Valley, they have a much pinker tone than the ones in the Delaware Valley. The orange lines is the marble. And you can see there's a great deal more marble on the east half of this and just a little bit on the west half. And all the ones that are in the west half are in stone walls. None of them are in situ. The gray stones are conglomerate, and that's predominantly used in the Heightstown area. You don't find them very many other places. The light blue, which is a gabbro, the hills of Trenton are gabbro, and so they were using that there. And sometimes it's difficult for me to tell gabbro from basalt, and I put the two together. And so Princeton, the mines are trap rock, which isn't gabbro, it's basalt, but sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. And then the granites, they're so sporadic, I really don't know what to say. And then you marry them all together on the very top row. All of them are on one level, and the only place you see a gap is right here. And that gap is about 2.5 miles. And that's the gap where they were using wood ties because they had run out of stone sleepers. And so these are just the different arrays that I have found in the ground, and it's just my way of documenting. This is the bridge in Bordentown. Now this is the oldest bridge, and you can see the date, keystone says 1831 there. And the voissiers, those blue blocks that are, or the red blocks that are very, very nicely cut. This picture 1842 in the lower left-hand corner is what the bridge looked like in 1842 before they put a building on top of it. And the picture above it is a recent photograph. And that photograph in the top center comes off the stock certificate for the Camden and Amboy Railroad. So they were advertising how wonderful this is by showing the John Bull steam engine and their bridge. So they're very, very proud of that. This is the underside of some of the bridges, and you'll see chiseled in the wall of with 2nd Street the letters SB in 1832 and SB 1832. And I think it's such neatly chiseled work that I believe this is the stonemason that built this bridge. This is a drawing done by William Cook, the engineer, for going underneath Joseph, so Joseph Bonaparte could go from his palatial estate to his farmland. There's a little teeny brook there, and he has a stone path going through there, and it's high enough, big enough for a horse and carriage. There's no reason in the world to have that unless you're the wealthiest man in the world and you don't want to go over the railroad track. And there's the letter explaining to him, and there's the diagram from the 1830s of how that bridge is going to look. This is one of the bridges that's in Bordentown. This is how you cross the Camden and Amboy on what you guys know as the Burlington Road, we know as the South Amboy Road, but there used to be a bridge going over the top of this. It's called High Bridge. This is the bridge to go over Crosswicks Creek. And I'm looking at this and I see the word 80, the number 83, and I'm thinking, what the heck is 83? And I look below and I see the letter JB. And I'm thinking, John Bull, 83, that doesn't make any sense. The John Bull wasn't in operation. It stopped being used in 1865, 1870. And then I looked at it and studied it a little bit more. And I realized that there's a 1 here and a 1 here. It's 1831. And this bridge right here is curved. It's got flying buttresses on the front of it. I know it doesn't look so good right here, but it's the best picture I could get of it. And there's other characteristics. This is an expensive bridge. On the other side, it's just a plain abutment. This is a well-done abutment. This is on Joseph Bonaparte's property. That JB is not John Bull, that's Joseph Bonaparte. And this is what it would have looked like when it was first done. This is the bridge on the other side. It's a rather plain one, Crosswicks Creek. And that's what the bridge would have looked like in the 1830s. That's my rendition. And this is, you can still see these wooden piers sticking out of the ground. You can still see the wharf where the stones would have been dropped off. These are other bridges that are across the facility. I'm never sure whether these are Camden and Amboy or Pennsylvania Railroad remakes. Other bridges. Those wooden posts sticking out of the ground are definitely Camden and Amboy, and the cement blocks is definitely PRR. This is a wharf on the Delaware River where the John Bull was reassembled, and this is a 500-foot long wharf, so there's many features. At low tide, you couldn't come to the wharf, so they had to build a pier out into the river. This is a modern rail with a Camden Amboy rail on top of it. On this side and the far side, not only is it the first railroad to use flat-bottom T-rails, it's also the first railroad to use dog-headed nails, fish plates, and rail plates. So the fish plates, before rails in England, the two rails butted up against each other and a heavy train went by, the rails would rise and fall. By putting a fish plate, this fish plate, you tie the two rails together and so that the rails did not separate. And this is a display that's in the museum, New Jersey State Museum, all the different styles of rail used by the Camden and Amboy Railroad.
What was the pound rating for the original rail?
It was in Wales, and I can't tell you the name right off it was by a guy named Guest.
How many pounds was it?
Oh, it's 40 pounds per yard. And there's the John Bull steam locomotive, the original and the reproductions. And these are the railroads that used stone sleepers in America. So the Camden and Amboy, this section of it, but the other ones are also other railroads that used stone sleepers. So this summarized, we've covered off a lot of this stuff, and I've already run over by far too much. So if you guys you've had questions all along here, if there's any other questions, I'll be happy to entertain you. Yes?
Was it just a single rail line, or did they have multiple rail lines?
It was a single rail line from Camden to South Amboy, but they had no communication. So if I'm driving a southbound train and you're parked, how am I supposed to get by you? So what there was a pullout about 500 to 1,000 feet long on the north side and the south side of every station. And that pullout would allow me to pull off into there. You could finish loading or unloading, go past me, and then I could go past you.
Yeah, one more question. How long was the travel? Did it take hours, 2 days, 1 day?
So I'll give a 2-minute explanation. Before, you had to leave New York City, get to South Amboy, walk or ride a carriage, ford streams, get to Bordentown, wait for the next boat leaving Bordentown to get to Philadelphia. That was a 5 to 7 day travel in good weather, good conditions. Good wind, good tides, everything. Once they got the railroad going in, to go from New York City to Philadelphia was 1 day. 3 years later, you could go from New York City to Philadelphia, leave a 6 o'clock train in a 6 o'clock boat in the morning, be in Philadelphia by 11 o'clock, work until 4 o'clock, and be back in New York City by 7:30.
What a revolution.
Yeah.
Are there any plans to make a park or walking trail along the abandoned parks?
So what Bordentown is trying to do right now is get ready for November 12, 2031, which will be the 200th anniversary of the first running of the John Bull. And in doing that, we've got the piece of property which is the junction of the Camden and Amboy main line and the Camden and Amboy branch line. On that piece of property, we're displaying the 14 styles of rail built by the Camden and Amboy Railroad. You saw 12 of them. We got 2 more to build. We've also got that stone obelisk that was for the 60th anniversary. There was a sister stone with that. That was taken down by Conrail in 2002. We found that in the woods. We've got that erected there. We've got an information kiosk, and so and a walking tour and a train tour from Bordentown to Trenton, Bordentown to Roebling. So that's what we're trying to do. Once we get that accomplished, and we started in 2022, hoping to be ready by 2031. We're getting there. So that's what our plans are.
It'd be nice to have a linear park from, say, Bordentown to Heights.
Yeah, I'm told that the New Jersey Trails Committee would like to do that. But that really, you need to have a bigger organization than Bordentown Historical Society.
Yes.
A little history of the area here. There was a crash on the Camden and Amboy well, there were numerous ones, but this one in particular, 1853, Main Street, you know where the old, Highway 18 bridge goes over Main Street right by Bound School, okay? And there was a crash there, multiple people killed, a train coming up from Philadelphia, and then a train going south from South Amboy. They checked their watches. The watches on the Philadelphia train were 2.5 minutes faster than the watches on the New York train. And eventually they developed regulator watches that were extremely precise just for reasons like that.
To add a little bit to that, a guy by the name of William Allen recognized all the cities had what was called local noon. So the noon for Philadelphia is when the sun's there. The noon for New York is when the sun's there, and noon for Boston is when the sun's there. And so that's noon. So this noon for Chicago is when the sun's there. So that's all local noon. So William Allen decided that the railroads, because if you leave Chicago at noon and you leave Philadelphia at noon, boom, you're going to be 15, 20, 30 minutes off. And so you miss trains because now you're in Philadelphia noon. So what he did was he designed standard time, broke the United States into 4 zones. Noon is exactly the same time everywhere in time zone 1, time zone 2, time zone 3. So if you left at noon, it was the same time every. And so he was from Bordentown. So.
Then why some clocks stopwatches at regulation or something? I think I've seen the word regulation.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes, Steve.
question.
So the question for those two, the holes in the,
Yeah.
what goes in the holes?
Well, first a small piece of wood go in there, and that piece of wood is called a tree nail. And then this spike went into the tree nail. So you have a hole, you put a piece of wood in there, and then you spike that in. And when the spike goes in, it expands the piece of wood and it locks the spike into the hole.
That's it gets wet. When the wood gets wet, it'll expand.
Yeah, it'll expand, and just because the wood you're putting, that's a 3/4 inch hole, you put in a 3/4 inch piece of wood, now you can pound it into there and it won't break the rock.
Some of them that have wormholes, they do.
Right, yes, and what would happen is in the wintertime, the stone would get lifted up. Now to put the stone back in the right place meant you had to get 5 guys to move a stone over and down. It was much easier to just chisel darts, drill 2 new holes.
Peter, thank you so much for coming out here.
Yeah, well,